I had just moved into the house 2 weeks earlier. It was older, yes, but sturdy, quiet, and buried in a part of town where the sidewalks ended and the trees seemed to watch you. I'd rented it from a woman named Judith who was almost too eager to be done with it. She handed me the keys with shaking hands and didn't make eye contact. I figured it was just an old woman tired of managing property. The first night was uneventful, but by the third, I began hearing it. Scratching. Faint at first, like mice in the walls. A soft, erratic scraping coming from below the floorboards near the back of the house. It didn't follow a rhythm. It wasn't the kind of sound that could be dismissed as plumbing or the creaks of an aging home. It came in sudden panic bursts. Then nothing. Silence. Until the next night. I bought traps. Poison. I even called pest control, but they found nothing. No trappings, no nests. Could be tree roots, they said. Sometimes they shift and make strange noises. But this wasn't roots. The sound wasn't static, it moved. One night I followed it, crawling across the floor on all fours, ear pressed to the hardwood. I felt ridiculous, but the scratching, it seemed to be responding to me. When I tapped the floor, it paused. When I pressed down, it skittered a few feet away. It felt aware. Eventually, I pinpointed it beneath the floor of the basement stairs. There was a hatch there. I hadn't noticed it before, tucked behind the shelves of old paint cans and broken tools. A low, square door flush with the ground, covered in dust and dry cobwebs. No handle, just a ring to pull it open. I should have stopped there. I should have left it alone. But curiosity always wears a friendly face. And fear. Fear only shows its teeth when it's too late. I waited until daylight, telling myself I was just being cautious. I opened the hatch with a crowbar, expecting to find insulation or maybe a forgotten crawl space. What I found instead was a narrow shaft, just big enough to fit a person if they crawled. The air that rose from it was cold. Not damp or mildew, just cold. And dry. Unnaturally dry. I lowered my phone flashlight into the hole. The beam disappeared into darkness far too quickly for something that shallow. It didn't reflect off walls. It didn't hit dirt. It was as if the light was being swallowed. That night, the scratching started again. But it wasn't random anymore. It circled directly beneath my bed. And then it began tapping. 3 slow taps. A pause. Then 4 rapid ones. Then silence. It kept repeating. 3, then 4. Like a pattern. Like communication. I couldn't sleep. I tried blasting music, tried moving rooms, but wherever I went, the scratching followed. Always beneath me. Always tapping out that same rhythm. And then, one night, something changed. It responded. I was lying in bed, paralyzed by the sound, when I grabbed a heavy book and slammed it against the floor in frustration. 1, 2, 3. Silence. Then from below, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. It had broken the pattern. Something beneath the floor was learning. I didn't sleep for days after that. My eyes sank. My appetite vanished. The house felt colder, no matter how high I turned the thermostat. And the longer I stayed, the more I began to feel that I wasn't alone. Not in a ghostly way. No cold spots or flickering lights. But presence. Like someone just behind a door you're afraid to open. Or the moment when the lights go out and you're not sure you're still alone. The sounds changed again. The scratching gave way to thumping. Gentle at first, like knuckles on a wooden table. Then louder. Like fists. Like someone desperate. I decided to record it. I set my phone to record overnight, leaving it on the floor beside my bed. In the morning, I played it back, expecting to hear the usual tapping. Instead, I heard breathing. Not mine. Not human, either. Shallow. Vet. With the occasional twitching rasp, like something clearing its throat in the dark. And then, just before the recording cut off, I heard my name. Not spoken, scratched. Deliberate. like nails carving syllables into the inside of coffin. I confronted Judith. She didn't pretend to be surprised. She didn't ask how I'd found out. All she said was, "You opened it, didn't you?" I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Her hands trembled as she sat down, sighing like she'd been waiting for this conversation to happen for years. She told me about her brother. He'd lived in the house before her. A quiet man, reclusive, eccentric, obsessed with acoustics, soundproofing, and isolation. He'd turned the basement into what he called an anechoic chamber. First faint, then insistent, and always at night. She tried selling the house, but every time the sale went through, the buyer would leave within weeks. No explicación, just the same look in their eyes, the same shaking hands. I moved out the next day, left everything behind, but the sounds came with me. I live in an apartment now, 3rd floor. No basements, no crawlspaces, nothing beneath me but someone else's ceiling. And yet, sometimes, just before sleep, I hear it. Faintly, from the floorboards. A familiar rhythm. 3 slow scratches, then 4 rapid ones. And then silence. But not the comforting kind. The kind that listens. And waits. It started with a strange noise, an almost imperceptible creaking that came from behind the furnace in the basement of my new house. I had just moved in a few weeks earlier, and everything about the place felt old, like it held secrets in every corner. But the basement, that was different. It was colder down there, not just in temperature, but in atmosphere. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones. At first, I thought the sound was just the old pipes expanding or contracting. This house was nearly a century old, after all, but the noise didn't match the usual groans of an aging home. It was deliberate, slow, like something was pushing against the walls. Curiosity gnawed at me until one night, after everyone else was asleep, I grabbed a flashlight and went downstairs. The beam of light bounced off peeling paint and cracked concrete walls. My footsteps echoed in the empty space. When I reached the furnace, the sound was louder, soft thuds, and what almost sounded like scratching. That's when I noticed it, a section of wall just behind the furnace that looked different. The bricks were cleaner, newer, almost out of place. It was a door, but not just any door. No handle, no hinges visible. Just a solid, flat surface that matched the rest of the wall, except for a thin crack around its edges. I tried pushing on it. Nothing. Then I looked down and saw a small, rusted keyhole near the bottom, barely noticeable beneath layers of dust and grime. My heart pounded. Who had locked a door in their basement? And why? I searched through the basement and the rest of the house, but found no key. That night, I barely slept, haunted by the idea of what could be hidden behind that door. Days later, I finally found an old box in the attic filled with rusty keys. They were covered in cobwebs and smelled of decay, but among them was a small, iron key that fit perfectly in the lock. Taking a deep breath, I turned the key. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a narrow, dimly lit room. The air inside was thick and stale, smelling of damp earth and something metallic, like rust or blood. My flashlight revealed stone walls covered in scratches and strange symbols etched deeply into the mortar. The floor was dirt, uneven and soft underfoot. There was no furniture, only a small wooden crate in the corner. I moved toward it cautiously and opened the lid. Inside, I found several old, yellow journals. The handwriting was frantic, almost unreadable in places. The first entry was dated back almost 50 years. I write these words in the hope someone finds them. They locked me here. I don't know why, but something terrible happened in this house. The furnace, it's not just to heat the rooms. It's a seal holding something in. As I read on, the writer described noises from beneath the floor, a presence they called the Whisperer, who lived in the shadows behind the furnace and fed on fear. They spoke of attempts to escape, banging on the door that never opened, and how every night the scratching came closer. The last page was smeared with something dark and dried. Suddenly, a cold gust swept through the room. The door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into absolute darkness. The scratching started again, right next to my ear. Closer, closer. I pounded on the door, shouting for help, but all I heard was the heavy breathing on the other side. Then silence. I don't know how long I sat there before the lock clicked and the door slowly opened again. I stumbled out, gasping for air, locking the door behind me and stuffing the key in my pocket. The basement felt different after that. Heavier, colder. The furnace hummed louder like it was alive. I never went back into that room. Sometimes late at night, I swear I hear scratching beneath the floorboards and a whisper just barely out of reach. It started subtly. A faint hesitation in the basement lights, steady glow, something I barely noticed at first. I go down to grab old boxes, do laundry, or fix the water heater, and the fluorescent bulbs hanging from the ceiling would suddenly dim for a second. Just a flicker. But only when I was alone. At first, I blamed the wiring. Our house is old, built in the 1950s, and the basement still has some original fixtures. Flickering lights are common, right? Maybe the bulb was loose or the voltage was uneven. But that wasn't the whole story. It didn't take long before the flickering became more pronounced. Not just a blink or two, but a series of rapid pulses like a strobe light trying to communicate. It only happened when I was the only one down there. If my wife or kids came with me, the light stayed steady, unwavering. One evening, after the sun had set and everyone was upstairs, I descended the creaky wooden stairs with a box of old photo albums. The moment I crossed the threshold, the single bare bulb above me began its erratic dance. Flicker, flicker, flicker. Shadows jittered wildly on the stone walls, warping and twisting as if alive. My heart started a race. I hesitated, but told myself it was just an electrical issue. I tried to shake off the unease and focused on my task. But then, a cold draft brushed past me, like a breath from an unseen presence. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and something else, something metallic, almost coppery. The light stuttered again and went out for a split second, plunging me into darkness. I froze. When it came back on, the shadows seemed to settle. But then I noticed something strange on the basement floor, a faint outline in the dust. At first, I thought it was just the shape of an old rug or some smudge, but it was too precise. It looked like the impression of a pair of footprints, but too small to be mine and not the shape of any shoes I recognized. I knelt to get a closer look. The dust had been disturbed recently. Something had been here recently. I swallowed hard, stood up, and glanced toward the far corner where the furnace sat. The flickering light pulsed faster, almost urgently, like a heartbeat in the gloom. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper, so soft I thought I imagined it at first. But it came again, barely audible, barely a breath of sound. Leave. My breath caught. I scanned the room, but there was no one. The basement was empty, save for me and the flickering bulb above. I grabbed the box and rushed back upstairs, locking the door behind me. The next day, I checked the wiring. The electrician confirmed everything was fine. The flickering was not electrical. He mentioned the old wiring could pick up interference, but nothing that would cause this pattern, especially only when I was alone. That night, curiosity got the better of me. I waited until everyone was asleep, then crept back down. The light flickered immediately, faster than ever. The shadows played tricks, but I forced myself to keep moving deeper into the basement. Suddenly, I felt a chill on the back of my neck and turned to see nothing. But the whispers returned, this time more insistent. "You shouldn't be here." I called out, voice trembling. "Who's there?" Silence. Then, a loud bang echoed from the far corner. The furnace again. I flicked on my phone flashlight and approached cautiously. The furnace was still. No sign of anything unusual. I exhaled in relief, but then spotted something I hadn't noticed before. A small hatch beneath the furnace, hidden by a thin layer of dust. It looked like a crawl space or a hidden cellar door. My pulse quickened. I hesitated. The flickering light seemed to dim, as if warning me not to open it. But I did. The hatch creaked open, revealing a narrow, pitch-black passage descending even deeper under the house. I shined my light inside. The air smelled heavier, colder. I debated whether to go down. Before I could decide, the light above flickered violently and then went out completely, plunging me into darkness. My phone light was the only thing holding back the blackness. And then, from the depths of that hole, a faint glow appeared. A pale, bluish light, pulsing softly. I stepped back, heart pounding, but something pulled me forward. I lowered myself through the hatch into the cold, cramped tunnel. The glow grew stronger as I crawled, revealing crude symbols scratched into the stone walls, circles intersected by lines, strange runes that seemed to pulse with the light. The whispers grew louder, overlapping voices that I couldn't understand but somehow recognized. They weren't angry, more desperate, sad. Then I saw it. A small chamber at the end of the tunnel, with an altar covered in old photographs, candles, and trinkets. Among the photos, I recognized the same footprints from the basement floor. Small children's shoes, dusty and worn. I realized this was a shrine, a memorial hidden beneath my own home. And then the flickering returned. But this time, it wasn't from above. It was coming from the altar candles, which flickered though there was no breeze. I reached out to touch one of the photos, a child's smiling face. Suddenly, the whispers stopped. Silence. Then, a gentle warmth spread through the chamber, and I felt a presence, not threatening, but watching. Waiting. I didn't stay long. Crawling back up, I closed the hatch carefully. Since then, the flickering has slowed. It still happens, but less often. I think it's a reminder, a message from something trapped beneath the surface in the basement's forgotten depths. The lights only flicker when I'm alone down there, because the past isn't ready to rest. And maybe neither am I. It started on an ordinary evening, the kind where nothing seems out of place. I had just moved in my new house, a modest two-story with a musty basement that smelled faintly of damp earth and old wood. I was alone. My family was away for the weekend, and I thought it would be the perfect chance to settle in and maybe unpack some boxes. The basement was mostly unfinished. Exposed pipes, bare concrete walls, and that old stone floor that creaked underfoot. Nothing unusual for a house this age, but the drain near the corner of the room caught my eye. It was a simple round grate embedded in the floor, the kind you expect in basements for water runoff. I'd barely paid it any attention until the very first night. As I was organizing some tools, I thought I heard something, faint, like a whisper carried on the wind. I froze, listening. Then I heard it again, a voice, soft, almost pleading, and it called my name. Jason. I stopped everything. The house was otherwise silent, except for the hum of the furnace. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. Maybe the pipes were shifting, or some animal trapped somewhere. I told myself I was tired, but the voice came back. Jason. Only this time, it wasn't just a whisper. It was clearer, almost desperate. I felt a chill ripple down my spine. I knelt down beside the drain and leaned in close. The voice seemed to come from beneath it, echoing back in strange tones. Jason, help me. I reached out to touch the grate. The metal was cold, but that was normal. What wasn't normal was the sudden rush of cold air that blew up from the drain, brushing against my face like a breath from a hidden world. I pulled back quickly, heart pounding. I told myself not to be ridiculous. There was no one down there. The basement was empty, or so I hoped. The next day, I checked around the house, looking for anything that might explain the voice. I examined the drain, but it looked perfectly ordinary. No cracks, no gaps. Just a hole in the floor covered by a sturdy metal grate. That night, the voice returned, more insistent, more urgent. "Jason, please." I stayed up, sitting by the basement door with a flashlight. When I finally gathered the courage to open the door, the beam of light danced across the dark concrete. I looked down at the drain and whispered, "Who's there?" No answer, just silence. But then the voice returned again, softer now, almost like a sigh. "Don't be afraid." Over the next few days, the voice became a constant companion. It called my name whenever I was near the basement, when I went down to grab something, when I cleaned, even when I passed the door upstairs. I started to notice strange things. Small items would be moved near the drain, a wrench, a piece of paper folded into a tiny square, even a coin. I didn't place them there. Sometimes I would hear faint tapping or scratching, as if something was trying to communicate through the metal grate. I told myself it was a trick of the mind, but deep down I was terrified. What was down there? And why was it calling me? One evening, I decided to investigate further. I found an old crowbar in the garage and carefully pried up the grate. It lifted with some effort, revealing a dark hole leading down into a narrow tunnel. The air that escaped was thick and stale, carrying a faint scent of something rotten. I shone my flashlight into the tunnel. It seemed to disappear into pitch blackness just a few feet away. I felt a strange pull, like the voice was beckoning me deeper. Suddenly, the voice came again, louder and more desperate than ever. "Jason, help me, please." I swallowed hard, almost dropping the flashlight. My mind raced with questions. How deep did this tunnel go? What was trapped down there? I wanted to run, but something held me back. A mixture of fear and a strange sense of responsibility. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house, every gust of wind, reminded me of the basement. I started having nightmares. Dark shapes crawling just beneath the surface, whispering my name, begging for release. Days turned into a week, and the voice never stopped. It was always there, a constant echo in my mind, even when I was nowhere near the basement. Then, one night, the power went out. The entire neighborhood was dark. I was alone in the pitch black, with only a small flashlight in my hand. I decided I had to face whatever was down there. I opened the basement door and crept down the stairs. The air grew colder with each step. I held the flashlight steady, its beams slicing through the darkness. When I reached the floor, I knelt by the open tunnel. "Who are you?" I whispered. The voice answered, clearer than ever, dripping with sorrow and desperation. "Trapped. Help me. Don't let them forget." I peered into the tunnel, but I could see nothing. Just endless darkness. I tried to call back, but my voice caught in my throat. Suddenly, I heard something behind me, a faint scraping sound. I spun around, shining the flashlight into every corner, but the basement was empty. Then the light flickered. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadow move just beyond the reach of the beam. The voice spoke once more, this time right behind me. "Jason, you're not alone down here." I jumped to my feet and scrambled up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut. I locked it and shoved a heavy dresser in front of it. I didn't sleep that night. The voice echoed in my mind, repeating my name like a curse. Over the next few days, I tried to forget about the basement, but I couldn't. I started noticing strange things in other parts of the house. Cold spots, objects moving, whispering shadows in the corners of my vision. I finally called a friend who was an expert in old houses and strange phenomena. When he came, he listened carefully as I told him about the voice and the tunnel. He examined the basement and frowned. This house was built over an old cellar that was sealed off decades ago. Sometimes, things trapped in places like this don't want to be forgotten. They want someone to hear them, to help them move on. I asked him what I could do. He said, "You have to find out who is calling you, what happened down there. Only then can the voice be silenced." That night, I returned to the basement with a notebook and flashlight. I spent hours listening to the voice, trying to understand its story. Piece by piece, the voice told me fragments about a man who had been hidden away, locked down in the cellar years ago, forgotten by everyone except the house itself. A man accused of something terrible, but who swore he was innocent. A man who died alone, calling out for justice. I realized then that the voice wasn't just a ghost. It was a plea for truth, a warning buried beneath the floorboards. I knew what I had to do next, but that's a story for another time. For now, whenever I hear that voice from the drain, I'm reminded that sometimes the past never stays buried, and some voices demand to be heard, no matter how deeply hidden they are. The day we moved into the old Victorian house at the edge of town felt like stepping back in time. The faded wallpaper, the creaking floorboards, the dust that seemed to settle into every corner. It all had a strange, unsettling charm. But it was the basement that drew my curiosity and unease more than anything else. From the beginning, the realtor had warned us. "The house has a long history," she said with a nervous smile. "Some say the basement is unusual." We laughed it off, chalking it up to local superstition or a sales tactic. We needed the house, and besides, it was perfect for our family, spacious, quiet, and affordable. The basement door was a heavy wooden slab with iron hinges that groaned like an old ghost whenever opened. We found it in the kitchen, tucked behind the pantry, almost hidden. At first, it was just storage for boxes, old furniture, and holiday decorations. But it didn't take long before strange things started happening down there. The first night, I heard a faint tapping noise coming from below. It was rhythmic, like someone drumming their fingers on a wall. I told myself it was just the house settling. Old houses did that. But the tapping grew louder over the next few nights, shifting from random taps to patterns, almost like Morse code. One evening, as I was stacking some boxes, the light flickered and went out. The basement was pitch black, except for a faint glow coming from the far corner near the furnace. My heart pounded as I inched closer, flashlight in hand. What I saw stopped me cold. A circle of small, carved symbols etched into the concrete floor. They looked ancient, not like anything modern tools could have made. Around the circle were scattered old photographs, yellowed and torn. They showed a family, but their faces were scratched out as if someone wanted to erase them from memory. I gathered the photos and symbols and rushed upstairs, but sleep was impossible that night. I kept hearing whispers coming from beneath the floorboards, voices too low to understand, but too persistent to ignore. My wife noticed my unease, but brushed it off, thinking I was just stressed about the move. Over the next few weeks, more odd things happened. Items moved from their places, shadows flickered at the edge of my vision, and the basement door would sometimes be left slightly ajar, even though I was sure I'd closed it tightly. But the worst was the dreams. In my dreams, I was standing in that basement circle, surrounded by shadowy figures with hollow eyes. They whispered warnings I couldn't comprehend, and every time I tried to run, the walls closed in, trapping me in the darkness. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart racing, unable to shake the feeling that something was watching me. Determined to get answers, I dug into the house's history. The local library held old records, newspapers, property deeds, and police reports. That's when I found something chilling. The house had been the site of a disappearance decades ago. A family had lived here before us, parents and 2 children. One day, the entire family vanished without a trace. The police searched everywhere, but no clues were ever found. The house stood empty for years until we moved in. What was even more disturbing was that the previous owners had reported strange noises and unexplained phenomena, especially coming from the basement. Some neighbors spoke in hushed tones about curses, about the darkness that lives below, but no one dared go near the place after sunset. That night, armed with new resolve, I went back down into the basement with a camera and a recorder. I wanted to document whatever was happening. The basement was cold, colder than it should be, and the air was thick with an unplaceable scent, like damp earth mixed with something metallic. As I set up the camera pointing at the symbol circle, I heard the tapping again, louder this time, echoing off the walls. Suddenly, the basement door slammed shut above me. The room plunged into darkness. My flashlight flickered and died. Panic set in as the whispers returned, now clearer, chanting a name. It was mine. I fumbled for my phone to use its light. As the beam hit the corner of the room, I saw something move, something human-shaped but grotesquely distorted, with eyes that reflected the faint glow like black mirrors. It reached toward me, and the basement seemed to stretch, the walls bending like a living thing. I dropped the phone, and it shattered on the floor, plunging me into darkness once more. I scrambled to the stairs, hands searching blindly, heart pounding as if it would burst. The whispers followed, growing louder, promising I wasn't alone, that I'd never be alone. When I finally burst into the kitchen, the door slammed behind me. I locked it, breathing hard, soaked in cold sweat. I knew, deep down, this house wasn't just haunted by memories. It was alive with something ancient and restless. Weeks later, my wife and I decided we couldn't stay. We packed up and left, but the nightmare didn't end there. A neighbor told me, months after we left, that another family had moved in. They too reported strange noises and the basement door slamming shut on its own. A local boy even claimed he saw shadows moving under the basement window late at night. I realized then, we weren't the first family to live in this house, and we likely won't be the last. Something beneath the floorboards waits, patient and hungry, keeping its secrets safe, its whispers growing louder with every family that dares call this place home. And I wonder how many others have heard those voices. How many have been pulled into the darkness without a trace? The basement isn't just a room beneath a house, it's a doorway. And some doors should never be opened. I never paid much attention to the basement when I first moved into the house. It was old like the rest of the place. Creaky wooden stairs, low ceilings, and that unmistakable smell of damp stone and dust. I was more focused on getting settled upstairs, painting walls, unpacking boxes. The basement was just there, mostly a storage space for junk left behind by the previous owners. The freezer sat in the farthest corner, bulky and rusted, humming softly like it had for decades. It was one of those old chest freezers, a solid slab of metal with a handle worn smooth from years of use. I assumed it was empty or filled with long-forgotten, spoiled food. I never gave it a second thought, until one evening, about 2 weeks after I moved in. That night, the power flickered. A storm was rolling in, and I heard the rain hammering against the windows. I was halfway through unpacking the kitchen when suddenly the fridge upstairs stopped humming. The power outage lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to make me worry about the freezer in the basement. Maybe something inside had thawed. I grabbed a flashlight and headed down. The basement stairs creaked beneath me as I descended, the air growing cooler and heavier with every step. My flashlight beam swept across old boxes, forgotten tools, and dusty shelves. When I reached the freezer, I hesitated. The air around it felt colder than it should be, like the chill wasn't just coming from the appliance itself, but something else. I shook it off and flipped open the lid. There was something inside, not frozen food, not bags of old meat or ice trays. Something else, something wrapped in a faded, stained tarp. The smell hit me before I could even get a good look. A metallic tang mixed with something sour, something sharp and unpleasant that clung to the air like a warning. I swallowed hard, heart pounding, and pulled back the tarp. Beneath it lay an old, weathered box. It was wooden, coated with a thick layer of grime, and bound with rusty metal clasps. I had the sudden urge to slam the freezer lid shut and run upstairs, but curiosity held me fast. I dragged the box out onto the basement floor. The wood creaked as I lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of small, carefully wrapped bundles. Each one was tied with twine, faded and brittle. My hands trembled as I untied the first bundle, revealing a handful of old, yellowed letters, brittle with age. They were tied together with a ribbon, fragile but intact. I unfolded the top letter. The handwriting was hurried but neat, ink faded but legible. It was dated back to the 1940s. "I can't keep this secret much longer," it read. "The basement hides more than just memories. I hear it at night, the scratching, the whispers. I don't know if it's real or if I'm losing my mind, but I fear what lies beneath." The letter was unsigned. I flipped through the rest. They were diary entries, letters to no one, filled with paranoia and dread, describing a presence in the basement, something that moved just out of sight, something cold and hungry. I shivered, glancing over my shoulder as if the basement walls themselves were listening. That night, I couldn't sleep. The memory of those words echoed in my mind. Scratching, whispers cold and hungry. I kept thinking about the freezer, the old box, the secrets hidden beneath layers of dust and ice. The next day, I started searching through public records for the house's history. What I found made my skin crawl. The house was built in the early 1900s by a man named Harold Finch, a recluse who vanished without a trace in the winter of 1943. Rumors around town said he was obsessed with the basement, convinced something was there. His wife left shortly after his disappearance, never speaking of the house again. No one ever found Harold, but neighbors spoke of strange noises, shadows flickering beneath the basement windows, and an unnatural cold that seeped into the ground. I had to know more. I went back to the basement, this time with gloves and a crowbar, prepared to pry open every corner and crack. The freezer, I noticed, was oddly bolted to the floor. Not just old, but deliberately secured. Why? What had Harold Finch hidden down here? I tried to move it, but it barely budged. I circled it, inspecting the walls and floor nearby. That's when I noticed a faint outline on the concrete. A rectangular patch, newer than the rest of the floor. It looked like a hidden hatch. My heart pounded as I knelt and traced the edges with my fingers. There was a latch, rusted but functional. I pulled it open slowly, the stale smell rising up like a breath from the earth. A narrow, steep set of stairs led down into darkness deeper than the basement itself. The air was colder here, almost biting. I shone my flashlight down. The beam caught something at the bottom. A small wooden door, sealed shut. I hesitated, fingers trembling on the latch. Something about this place whispered warnings. But I was hooked now, pulled by the same curiosity that had gripped Harold Finch all those years ago. I pushed the door open. The room inside was small, no bigger than a closet. The walls were lined with shelves, covered in thick dust and cobwebs. But what caught my eye was the center of the room, a stone basin filled with dirty, dark water like a stagnant pool. Above it hung a single, flickering bulb on a rusted chain. The light barely penetrated the gloom, but I could see something else. Carved into the stone walls, just beneath the waterline, were symbols. Strange, looping shapes. Some looked like letters, others like eyes. The carving seemed almost alive, twisting and shifting when I looked away and back again. I dropped my flashlight. The clatter echoed through the silence. My heart jumped. Then I heard it. A faint scratching. from beneath the water, soft like fingernails tapping against stone. I scrambled backward, choking on the cold air. The silence that followed was worse, heavier, as if the basement itself was holding its breath. I fled upstairs, slamming the hatch shut behind me, locking it with a heavy chain I found in the basement. For nights after, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The freezer hummed louder than before, almost like it was alive. Sometimes, I'd hear a faint whisper carried on the cold drafts that seeped through the basement cracks. I never opened that freezer again. But sometimes when the house is still and the wind howls outside, I swear I can hear the scraping beneath the floorboards, and the old freezer wasn't empty after all. When we first moved into the house, the basement was the last place I wanted to go. Old, damp, and dimly lit by a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, it already felt like a place forgotten by time. But it was my sanctuary, somewhere away from the noise upstairs, so I started spending time down there, tinkering on projects or just escaping the chaos of everyday life. One afternoon, while rummaging through a pile of old boxes, I noticed something strange. There was a full-length mirror propped awkwardly against the far wall, hidden behind a stack of dusty furniture. It was old, really old, with an ornate wooden frame carved in curling vines and thorny branches. The glass was strangely smoky, not quite clear, almost as if something was lurking just beneath its surface. I rubbed off the grime and wiped the glass clean. When I looked into it, nothing felt right. It didn't show me, not even a shadow. I stood in front of it, raising my hand slowly to touch the surface. My reflection should have been there, should have been staring back at me. But all I saw was a dim, empty room behind the glass, as if the mirror was a window looking somewhere else, somewhere I wasn't. The air around me grew colder, the basement suddenly too quiet, too still. I stepped back. I thought maybe it was a trick of the light or a warped pane of glass. I waved my arm again, still no reflection. I even clapped my hands and made faces, but the mirror stayed silent and empty. It was like looking into a void. That night, sleep eluded me. I kept thinking about the mirror and what it might mean. Was it broken? Or was something else going on? I wasn't sure if I should be curious or terrified. Over the next few days, I tried to avoid the basement, but the mirror drew me back. I started noticing subtle changes. When I passed by it, I could sometimes catch a flicker, like a shadow moving just beneath the surface. It wasn't me. Not really. One evening, I went down there with a flashlight, determined to figure out. The basement smelled musty, like old wood and forgotten memories. The beam of light cut through the darkness, landing on the mirror's frame. As I got closer, I noticed faint scratches etched into the glass. They weren't random. They formed words, but they were almost impossible to read. I grabbed a damp cloth and carefully traced the scratches. The words slowly emerged, looked deeper. A shiver ran down my spine. I pressed my palm against the mirror again, trying to find any clue beneath the glass. Suddenly, the surface rippled like water. I jerked my hand away, heart pounding. The basement lights flickered, and then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement in the mirror. A figure, shadowy and indistinct, standing just behind the glass. It was tall, but its face was hidden in darkness. It didn't move toward me, but it wasn't passive either. Its presence was heavy, watching. I blinked. The figure vanished. I stumbled backward, almost tripping over a broken chair. The basement felt suffocating now, as if the mirror had sealed the room in silence and cold. That night, I dreamed of the basement. I was drawn back there by a whisper, soft, barely audible, like a sigh drifting through cracks in the walls. I followed the sound until I stood before the mirror. The glass was alive, swirling with shadows and faint faces, some crying, some screaming, some begging. and then I heard it clearly. "Help us." I woke up gasping. I couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror was a prison, holding something trapped, or maybe something waiting. Over the next few days, my dreams grew worse. I'd hear footsteps behind me, whispers just out of sight, and sometimes when I looked at my reflection in other mirrors, it was distorted, like something was trying to bleed through the glass, trying to reach me. One morning, I found the basement door wide open. I never leave it unlocked. My heart sank as I descended the stairs, clutching a flashlight. The mirror stood where I left it, but something was wrong. The smoky glass had darkened, and now I could see my reflection, but it wasn't me. The reflection smiled, a slow, cruel smile that didn't match the fear I felt. I blinked, and it mimicked my movements perfectly, except its eyes stayed locked on me, unblinking and hollow. Suddenly, I realized the reflection was trying to pull me in, pulling at the edges of my mind, whispering promises of escape and freedom. It wanted me to step closer, to touch the glass, to become part of whatever lay beyond. I slammed the basement door shut and bolted upstairs, shaking and breathless. I never went down there again. But sometimes late at night, I catch glimpses of that smile in other mirrors around the house. And I wonder, what if it's not just the basement mirror that doesn't show my reflection? What if it's me who's slowly disappearing into the darkness behind the glass? It started with a noise, a faint scraping sound, almost like fingernails on stone, coming from the far corner of my basement. At first, I thought it was just the house settling or maybe a small animal trapped somewhere. But the sound grew louder over the weeks, steady and deliberate, always coming from beneath the floorboards near the back wall. I live alone in an old farmhouse I inherited from my grandfather. It's been in the family for generations, but no one had lived here for years before me. The house creaks, sighs, and groans like it's haunted, and maybe it is. But I never expected to find what I did. One rainy evening, with the sound becoming unbearable, I grabbed a flashlight and a crowbar and went down to investigate. The basement is small, cluttered with old furniture, dusty boxes, and the remnants of my grandfather's woodworking projects. I knelt down and pried at the loose floorboard where the noise seemed loudest. Underneath was something impossible, a narrow opening, just wide enough for me to crawl through. The edges of the hole were jagged, as if carved by hand, but no tools or construction marks were visible. The walls inside were rough stone, untouched by time or machinery. The tunnel led away from the house, descending deeper underground. Curiosity pushed me in. I took my phone for light and started crawling. The air was thick, musty, and cold, carrying a faint metallic scent that made my skin crawl. The scraping sound was gone now, but a faint whispering filled the space, like a language just beyond comprehension. The tunnel twisted and turned, never straight, as if it was following some ancient path. After crawling for what felt like hours, I reached a small chamber, an empty cavern carved out of stone, with walls stained dark. The floor was covered with dirt and scattered bones, animal, and maybe not. On one wall, I noticed strange symbols etched deeply into the rock. They weren't any language I recognized, something older, primal. They pulsed in my flashlight's beam, almost as if alive. That's when I heard it, a low growl from the darkness behind me. Heart pounding, I swung my flashlight around but saw nothing. The whispering returned, growing louder and more frantic, and the tunnel seemed to shift beneath me, closing in. I scrambled back toward the opening, but the path I came in on seemed gone. Instead, new tunnels appeared, twisting and branching in impossible ways, like a maze that shifted to trap me. Panic set in as I realized this was no ordinary tunnel. It was something alive or cursed. A trap laid long ago. I sat down, trying to catch my breath. The whispers became words, calling my name, promising secrets and power if I stayed. But I knew better. I knew that whatever lived here wanted to keep me forever. Hours later, when I finally found my way back, I emerged covered in dirt, trembling, with the basement silent once more. The hole I had crawled through was no longer visible, just a solid floorboard with no sign it had ever moved. Since that night, the noises have stopped, but sometimes I swear I hear whispering beneath the house. And I'm afraid to look for the tunnel again, because some things aren't meant to be found. Some tunnels lead not just underground, but to places your mind can't handle. There's something about basements. They feel distant from the rest of the house, as if they exist in their own shadowed dimension, dimly lit, filled with old forgotten things, and silence so thick it presses on your chest. My basement was no different. At first, it was just a place for storage, boxes of holiday decorations, old furniture, and the kind of things you don't want cluttering up your living room, but never quite feel brave enough to throw away. When we moved into the house, I didn't think much of the basement. It was cold, musty, and had the faint smell of damp wood. But the deeper we settled in, the more it felt like something was off. Something I couldn't name. The smell was the first warning. It started subtly, a faint scent like rotting earth mixed with a sour, acidic undertone. Nothing you'd notice unless you were down there for a long time. I didn't pay much attention to it first. I assumed it was just the typical basement funk, but the smell wasn't consistent. It came and went, almost like it had a rhythm of its own. That rhythm began to sync with a strange feeling I had. A quiet anxiety that crept in when I went down there alone, especially at night. I tried to ignore it. Then I started praying. It wasn't something I did often before, but the unease became so thick, so suffocating. I found myself whispering prayers quietly in the basement, hoping for some kind of protection or peace. Just a little comfort in that cold, dark space. That's when things got worse. Every time I prayed, the smell worsened. It wasn't gradual. It intensified sharply, like the basement was reacting or resisting. The moment I bowed my head, the sour, rotten scent grew stronger, filling my lungs with a heaviness that made my eyes water and my stomach churn. It was as if the very act of praying disturbed something lurking beneath. The basement was no longer just a physical place. It was a battleground. I began to notice subtle changes in the environment as well. The old wooden stairs creaked louder than usual. Shadows flickered just beyond the reach of my flashlight. The air grew colder, sometimes unnaturally so. I started leaving a small candle burning downstairs, hoping it might ward off whatever was there. But the smell remained, and it grew more sinister. One night, I sat on the cold concrete floor, clutching a rosary my grandmother had given me. I whispered the prayers softly, desperate for comfort. The smell immediately thickened, and then, as if triggered by my fear, I heard it. A faint sound, almost like whispering. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but the sound came again. Soft murmurs, tangled in the basement's damp air. They weren't words I could understand, just unsettling syllables, like the basement itself was speaking in a language meant to unsettle. My heartbeat thundered. I scrambled to my feet and rushed upstairs, but the smell lingered in my nose long after I closed the door behind me. The next day, I tried to research the house's history. The previous owner had left abruptly, selling the house for a surprisingly low price. Neighbors avoided talking about it. I discovered that the house had once been used for something else, something hidden. Decades ago, the basement had been modified. The walls were thicker, the flooring replaced, and strange metal fittings embedded deep in the concrete. The house had been a safe house during a turbulent period, a place to hide people, secrets, maybe even sins. It made sense. The smell was like decay, but also like the residue of forgotten horrors, trapped and seeping through the very walls. That night, I decided to face the basement again. But this time, I didn't bring prayer. I brought a recorder, a camera, and a notebook. As I descended the stairs, the familiar stench hit me, but I forced myself to stay calm. The whispering started again, low, almost beckoning. I switched on the recorder and began to speak aloud, describing the space and my feelings. The whispers shifted, seeming to respond, growing more urgent, more agitated. Suddenly, the candle I brought blew out, even though there was no draft. In the darkness, I felt a presence, weightless but pressing against my chest. I fumbled to turn on my flashlight. The beam landed on the far wall, revealing something I hadn't noticed before. Faint scratches, claw-like marks, etched into the concrete. They were arranged in a pattern, almost like a symbol. I traced them with my fingers, feeling a cold pulse beneath the surface. The whispering rose to a hiss and then stopped abruptly. For a moment, everything was silent. Then I heard the sound of breathing, slow, deliberate, just behind me. I spun around, but the basement was empty. Only the faint glow of the camera's red recording light stared back at me. I bolted upstairs, heart pounding. When I played back the audio later, the whispers were clearer than before. They weren't random sounds, they were warnings. And the smell? It was stronger in the recording than in reality. Like the basement was warning me not to come back, not to pray, not to disturb. Since then, I've avoided the basement. I leave the door shut, hoping to keep whatever is down there trapped. But sometimes late at night, when I'm alone and the house is quiet, I swear I can smell it again. That terrible sour scent, growing stronger every time I bow my head, every time I whisper a prayer. The basement doesn't want to be cleansed. It doesn't want salvation. It wants to be left alone. And sometimes I wonder if what lives down there is waiting for me to come back. They say dogs can sense things we can't. Some call it intuition, others call it sixth sense. But I never truly believed it until my dog refused to go near the basement door. It started about a week after we moved into the old house on Maple Street. The kind of house with creaky floors, drafty windows, and a basement that smelled like damp earth and forgotten secrets. I'd always wanted a place with character. My dog, Max, was a lively German shepherd, loyal and fearless. Or so I thought. At first, Max loved exploring the house. Every room was a new adventure. But the basement door, that old wooden door at the end of the narrow hallway, was different. Every time I tried to open it, Max would growl low in his throat, his body stiffening, hackles rising. He'd back away slowly, eyes fixed on the door like it held something terrible inside. I laughed it off. Maybe he just didn't like the smell. Basements usually have that musty, moldy scent. But as days passed, his reaction grew more intense. He wouldn't just avoid the door. He refused to even step into the hallway when the door was open. His ears flattened, and he'd whimper softly, retreating to the safety of the living room. One night, I was alone. The house was silent except for the occasional creak and the hum of the furnace. I heard Max growling downstairs, but the basement was off limits to him. I called out his name, but he wouldn't come. That's when I heard it, a soft scratching, almost like fingernails scraping against wood, coming from the basement. I told myself it was just the old pipes settling. The house was nearly a century old, after all. Still, curiosity gnawed at me. I grabbed a flashlight and headed to the basement door. Max was nowhere to be seen. The door was slightly ajar, swaying gently as if pushed by a breeze. But the windows were all shut tight. The scratching stopped as soon as I reached the threshold. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open fully. The basement was cold and dark, the air thick with dust. My flashlight beam danced across the cluttered shelves, old furniture, and cobwebs. At the far end, the furnace hummed quietly. I stepped down the creaky stairs, each footstep echoing ominously. Suddenly, the basement light flickered and went out. I was plunged into darkness. I heard Max's bark, sharp and panicked, from behind me. I whipped around, but there was no sign of him. I fumbled with my flashlight, finally getting it to flicker back on. That's when I saw it. A pair of deep, dark stains on the concrete floor, leading from the furnace to a small, rusted hatch in the corner of the room. The hatch wasn't there before, or at least I hadn't noticed it. Heart pounding, I approached the hatch. It was sealed shut with old chains and a heavy padlock, but something about it felt wrong. The chains were loose, as if someone or something had been messing with them recently. Max's barking grew louder, frantic. I turned to see him standing rigid near the basement door, eyes wide, teeth bared. Then a low, guttural growl echoed from beneath the hatch. Frozen, I stepped back. The growl morphed into a whisper, faint and almost human. "I see you." The words chilled me to the bone. That night, I barely slept. Max stayed close, refusing to leave the basement door side. In the morning, I found scratch marks on the doorframe, deep, jagged, as if claws had raked through the wood from the other side. I started digging into the house's history. What I found was disturbing. Decades ago, the house had belonged to a man named Elias Crow, a recluse rumored to dabble in dark rituals. Locals whispered about disappearances and strange noises from the basement. Elias had vanished without a trace, and the house was abandoned for years. I wondered if the hatch had been a secret entrance to something sinister, an underground chamber, a prison for something unnatural. That night, I tried to ignore the unease, but Max's behavior only worsened. He refused to eat, pacing anxiously near the basement door. Then the whispers started again, soft, barely audible, but unmistakably there. "You can't hide. Open the door." I told myself it was my imagination, the stress of moving, the creaks and groans of an old house playing tricks on my mind. But Max never lied. One evening, as I sat reading in the living room, I heard the basement door slam shut. Max bolted downstairs, barking furiously. I followed, heart racing. The chains on the hatch were broken, lying in twisted piles on the floor. The padlock was shattered, but the hatch remained closed. Max stood growling at the wall opposite the hatch, where the concrete was cracked and stained. I knelt down and noticed faint symbols etched into the wall. Strange, looping patterns that seemed to pulse under the flashlight's beam. The air grew colder, and I felt a presence, something watching, waiting. Suddenly, a cold breath brushed my neck. I spun around, but no one was there. Max whimpered, tail tucked between his legs. Then the whisper came again, closer this time. "Let me out." That night, I barricaded the basement door with everything I could find. Max slept at the top of the stairs, eyes alert and ears twitching. But when dawn came, the barricade was broken. The door stood wide open, the basement silent. I knew then the basement held something beyond fear, a darkness that had been waiting beneath my feet all along. And Max, well, Max still refuses to go near that door. It started with the pipes. At first, it was just the usual creaks and groans you expect in an old house. The kind of noises that settle in after the heating kicks on or when the temperature drops low enough to make the wood and metal contract. But there was something different about this sound, something almost deliberate. The first time I noticed, it was late at night, just as I was about to fall asleep. A soft tapping coming from somewhere beneath the floor. I assumed it was just the old plumbing adjusting. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination playing tricks in the silence. But the taps grew louder and more rhythmic, more deliberate, like a pattern. Every few nights, it returned. Sometimes 3 taps, sometimes 4, always the same rhythm. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe a loose pipe or the wind. But curiosity gnawed at me. One evening, I decided to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight and descended into the basement, a cold, dim space that smelled faintly of mildew and dust. The walls were lined with peeling paint and rusty pipes that snaked along the ceiling and walls like the veins of some ancient beast. I crouched near the main water pipe, the source of the knocking. For a long moment, all I heard was silence, except for the low hum of the furnace. Then suddenly tap, tap, tap. I froze. I shined my flashlight toward the pipe. No loose fittings, no rattling joints. I placed my hand on the pipe, expecting maybe a vibration or a strange echo, but felt nothing out of the ordinary. Just the house settling. I whispered to myself, though doubt crept in. Over the next few weeks, the knocking became more frequent. It wasn't just at night anymore. Sometimes it echoed faintly during the day. The pattern shifted too. Sometimes it was slow and methodical, other times rapid, almost like a code. I started jotting down the times and rhythms. Top, 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 pesa, top, top. It was almost like a message. But what? The knocking wasn't the only strange thing in the basement. I began noticing cold spots, pockets of icy air that seemed to hover in certain corners. Sometimes my flashlight flickered inexplicably, and on a few occasions, I heard soft whispers, barely audible but unmistakable. One night, after a particularly heavy rainstorm, I woke up to the sound of water dripping. But this time, the knocking came from the basement ceiling, not the pipes. It was louder, closer, and much more insistent. I couldn't sleep. The next day, I ventured into the basement again, flashlight in hand, heart pounding. I examined the ceiling where the pipes ran, shining the light along the beams and concrete. That's when I saw it. A small hole no bigger than a fist in the concrete ceiling, something I had never noticed before. Around the hole, the edges looked freshly chipped, like something had clawed or chipped its way through. I pressed my ear against the hole. Tap, tap. This time, the knocks responded to my presence. Curious and unnerved, I tapped back once. Silence. Then almost immediately, 3 quick knocks. I swallowed hard. Was this some kind of reply? I spent the next few days obsessed with that hole. I drilled a tiny hole through the concrete to see if I could listen better, but only ever heard those knocking sounds, always in response to my own tapping. It was like some strange, secret conversation with an unseen entity. One evening, I told a close friend about the noises. He was skeptical, of course, but agreed to come over and listen with me. We descended into the basement together. The knocking started slow and measured. I tapped 3 times. Almost instantly, a series of knocks responded. My friend frowned, visibly unsettled. "This isn't normal," he said quietly. Then the knocking started to shift, changing tempo, as if growing impatient. Suddenly, from behind the pipes, a faint scraping sound began. We both froze. The scraping grew louder, more frantic, until it sounded like something was trying to squeeze through the narrow space between the pipes and the wall. I shone my light into the gap and saw nothing, just darkness. Then a sharp knock, right on the pipe where I had placed my hand before. Except this time, it was followed by a hollow, dragging sound like something heavy being pulled across the concrete floor. My friend grabbed my arm. "We should get out," he whispered. But I was rooted in place, a mix of terror and curiosity holding me fast. That night, the knocks didn't stop. They echoed through my dreams, always at the same intervals, always calling. I started waking up in the middle of the night, heart racing, feeling as if something was watching me from beneath the floor. One night, I decided to confront it. I lowered myself beneath the basement floorboards where the noise seemed loudest. The old wooden boards creaked under my weight. The knocking came again, clear and sharp. I tapped back and waited. Suddenly, a cold breath hit my neck, and the knocking turned frantic, rapid, erratic, almost angry. I scrambled back up, heart pounding, nearly knocking over the flashlight. After that night, things escalated. Doors to the basement would slam shut on their own. Objects shifted places. Things I knew I had left somewhere appeared miles away. My dog refused to enter the basement, growling low and backing away. One afternoon, when I was alone, I heard the knocking start up again. This time, it wasn't just tapping on the pipes. It was knocking from inside the walls. Slow at first, then pounding. Like a desperate plea, I pressed my ear against the cold drywall, feeling the vibrations. Then a voice, so faint I almost doubted it. A whisper. Help! I jumped back. The voice didn't return. I told myself it was a trick of the mind, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was trapped. Something desperate. Weeks later, I found a journal tucked behind a loose brick in the basement wall. The entries were old, decades old, describing a family who once lived in the house. They mentioned strange noises, knocking, and a hidden room beneath the basement floor. The last entry ended abruptly with a desperate note. They come for us at night. The walls have ears. The pipes speak. If you find this, beware the knocking. It's not just the house, it's something beneath it. I've since tried to pry up the floorboards where the knocking originates. But every time I start, something stops me, a cold pressure in my chest, a feeling of dread so thick it chokes the air. The knocking continues every night, as if waiting for me to listen, to answer. And sometimes, just before dawn, I swear I hear something moving beneath the basement floor. Heavy footsteps dragging chains, or worse. Now I wonder, was it ever just the pipes? Or was the knocking always a warning? The first time I noticed the clock was about a week after we moved into the old house on Maple Street. It wasn't part of the furniture that came with the place, and I certainly hadn't brought it with me. The clock hung on the cracked concrete wall of the basement, just above the ancient boiler that still groaned and rumbled when it fired up. The face of the clock was old-fashioned, round, wooden frame, yellowed glass covering its hands. What caught my attention wasn't its age, but the fact that it was counting down. At first, I thought it was broken. The second hand wasn't moving forward like any normal clock. It ticked backwards, slowly but deliberately, as if rewinding time. The minute hand followed the same unsettling path, creeping backward through the hours. The hour hand, though, barely moved. It seemed almost frozen, inching slowly in reverse. The strange thing was the clock started from exactly 24 hours every time I looked at it. No matter when I glanced its way, the countdown never paused or reset. It just kept moving backward, second by second, minute by minute, until it reached zero. I asked my wife, Lily, about it. She told me it wasn't there when she last checked the basement, and she certainly didn't hang it up. I began to wonder if I'd imagined the clock entirely, but every morning as I went down to get the laundry, it was there, counting down in reverse. One night, I decided to watch it. I sat in the corner of the basement, eyes fixed on the clock's face. The dim light from the single bulb swung gently above, casting shadows across the peeling paint and the dusty floor. The second hand ticked backward, 59, 58, 57. The silence was almost unbearable. Then it stopped. The second hand froze at exactly 7 seconds. 7 seconds left on the countdown. My breath caught. 7 seconds to what? I held my breath, waiting for something to happen. The seconds didn't move. The air grew colder. I could hear a faint humming, like electricity buzzing beneath the walls. Then, suddenly, the basement door slammed shut upstairs. The lights flickered and went out. I was plunged into total darkness. I fumbled for my phone, its light barely cutting through the black. While I looked back at the clock, it was gone. The next morning, I told Lily about the clock. She was skeptical, of course, and suggested it might be stress from a move. But when I showed her the basement wall, where the clock had hung, there was nothing but a faded stain on the concrete. No nails, no holes. That's when the nightmare started. Each night, I dream of the basement clock ticking down. The hands moved closer and closer to zero, but the deeper the dream went, the heavier the air became, the darker the basement got. I could hear whispers, soft, unintelligible murmurs, like someone counting down in a language I couldn't understand. On the third night, I woke up gasping. My entire body was drenched in sweat. I felt an overwhelming dread, the kind that clings to your bones. The next day, I tried to shake it off. But when I went back into the basement, I found something strange. Carved into the concrete wall, right where the clock had hung, were numbers. Deep, crude etchings in the shape of a countdown. 24, 23, 22. I ran my fingers over the cold, rough surface. The numbers seemed fresh, as if someone or something had been there overnight. But the house was empty, just me and Lily. That evening, Lily mentioned something odd. She said she heard footsteps coming from the basement, slow and deliberate, even though we were alone in the house. When I told her about the numbers, she agreed to help me look for answers. We searched the basement thoroughly, the boiler room, the dusty shelves behind the furnace, but found nothing else. No sign of the clock. No sign of whoever or whatever was leaving the countdown on the wall. A week later, the numbers had changed. The etchings now read 17, 16, 15, the countdown continuing. We became obsessed. Every morning, we descended into the basement to check the numbers, and every day, they moved closer to zero. The more they changed, the heavier the air felt. It was like the basement was waiting for something. One night, Lily refused to go down with me. She said the basement felt wrong, like a presence was watching us. I agreed, but couldn't stay away. At exactly midnight, I crept down the creaky stairs with only my flashlight. The beam of light flickered, casting strange shadows on the walls. I stopped in front of the countdown. Tonight it read 05, 04, 03. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted. My breath fogged in front of me. The flashlight flickered and died. The darkness wrapped around me like a shroud. Then came the whisper. Soft, almost inaudible at first, but growing louder. Repeating the numbers, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The basement door slammed somewhere behind me. I spun around, fumbling for my phone, but it was dead. No signal, no light, just the suffocating black. Then I saw it. A faint glow emanating from behind the boiler. The shape of the clock. Its face lit up with an otherworldly blue light. The hands were moving now, forward but faster than any clock should. Tick, 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 almost like a heartbeat. I tried to step back, but the floor felt sticky like something was pulling me down. The countdown hit 0. The light exploded. Suddenly, I was back upstairs in my bed, heart pounding. The morning sun was streaming through the curtains. The basement door was wide open. I thought it was over, but then I noticed the clock on my bedroom wall. It was the same clock, the same countdown, and it was starting over. It started as a faint noise, a barely perceptible scratching, like nails dragging slowly across bricks, coming from the far corner of my basement. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, or maybe a mouse trapped somewhere. But the more I listened, the more I realized this sound wasn't natural. It had a rhythm, almost like it was trying to communicate, tapping, scratching, a slow crescendo growing louder each night. The basement was old, built long before I moved in. The brick walls were thick, coated with decades of dust and peeling paint. I'd spent countless hours down there, storing boxes and old furniture, but never once had I paid much attention to the farthest wall. Until that first night, I heard the noise. I was alone, the house quiet except for the ticking of the clock upstairs. The scratching started low, distant, but unmistakably coming from inside the bricks themselves. Curiosity and maybe a hint of dread drove me to investigate. I got a flashlight, my hands shaking slightly as I approached the corner where the sound originated. The bricks were cold to the touch, but then I noticed something strange. A single brick, darker than the others, slightly recessed. When I pressed on it, it shifted just a fraction and then stopped. My heart pounded. I stepped back and shone my flashlight on the spot. It looked like a sealed doorway, disguised by the brickwork. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide it. But why? And what was behind it? Over the next few nights, the noises grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't just scratching anymore. I could hear faint whispers, like murmurs I couldn't quite understand, mixed with soft thumps. I started recording the sounds on my phone. At first, it was just static and scratching, but when I listened back with headphones, I thought I heard a name. My name, whispered so faintly it could have been my imagination. Sleep became impossible. I avoided the basement, but the noises found ways to seep into my waking hours. Shadows moved at the edges of my vision. Objects shifted position. My dog, usually fearless, refused to go near the basement door, growling low and baring his teeth at the silence beyond. One evening, after a week of torment, I decided I had to confront whatever was there. I found an old crowbar in the garage and set to work on the brick wall. The bricks were loose, crumbling in my hands more easily than they should. I pried one loose, then another, until I created a small opening just big enough to peer inside. Inside was darkness, thick and absolute. But the air smelled wrong, like damp earth mixed with something metallic and sharp. Then, from deep within, the whispers rose again, clearer this time, urgent and pleading. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was desperate. I dropped the crowbar and stumbled back, heart racing. The opening was a hidden space, a small room, sealed away from the rest of the house. Something had been trapped in there or hiding. That night, I couldn't sleep again. At 3:13 a.m., the noises reached a terrifying peak. The wall shook violently, bricks rattling like they wanted to break free. The whispers became a cacophony of voices, crying, laughing, screaming all at once. I could feel the pressure in the room change, as if whatever was behind the wall was pushing against its prison. In the morning, I showed the hole to a friend who was a contractor. He was uneasy but helped me remove more bricks, widening the hole. We found something unexpected, a small, dirt-covered crawl space, about 6 feet deep and barely wide enough to squeeze through. Inside the crawl space were remnants of old belongings, a rusted doll, a broken music box, and scraps of yellowed paper covered in strange symbols and indecipherable writing. The air was colder there, and the silence was suffocating. I brought in an old EVP recorder, hoping to capture voices, but the device only recorded static punctuated by occasional faint breathing sounds. The more time I spent near the hole, the more I felt watched, as if unseen eyes were tracking my every move. One night, the whispers changed. They spoke in a clear voice, demanding release. "Let me out," they said. "Help me." I debated telling anyone, but the basement had become a place of dread. Every time I went down there, the feeling of being drawn in grew stronger. Shadows flickered just out of reach, and that tapping on the bricks became a pounding beat, like a heartbeat echoing through the walls. I tried sealing the hole with new bricks and mortar, but by morning, the bricks were cracked, and the noise resumed, louder than ever. I realized this wasn't just a haunting. Something alive was trapped behind that wall, something ancient and angry. Now, every night, I lie awake listening for the pounding. I don't know what will happen when it finally breaks through. But one thing is certain, whatever is behind that brick wall isn't done yet.